Continuing lesson 4.8, talking about independent and dependent variables. On page 230, number 2, Jake and Viola record the number of miles M they bike to help track the number of calories C they burn in an hour. Viola says the number of calories C they burn is the dependent variable. Do you agree, and explain? So the question, again, we can phrase two ways. We're talking about the number of miles they bike is M, and the number of calories they burn, C, in an hour. Number of calories they burn in an hour. So we could think about whether does the number of miles we bike depend on how many calories burn. Number of miles we bike depend on the number of calories we burn, or does the number of calories we burn depend on the number of miles we bike? Eden?
The number of calories we burn depends on the number of miles we bike.
Good. So the calories is dependent then, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Good. So we could say yes, the calories they burn depends on how many miles they bike. Number 4, once again, they want us to identify the independent variable and the dependent variable. So the amount of money M earned if T raffle tickets are sold. So we want to think about is the amount of money earned depend on how many raffle tickets are sold, or does the number of raffle tickets sold depend on how much money we have earned?
M is dependent because it depends on how many.
Good. M is our dependent variable. The amount of money we earn depends on how many raffle tickets we sell. So M is the dependent variable and T is the independent variable. Number 5, we have the number of hours H worked and the amount of money M earned. So we're going to think about, does the number of hours we work depend on how much money we earn, or does how much money we earn depend on how many hours we work? So for this one, H would be our independent variable, and M is the dependent variable. The money we earn depends on how many hours we work. Moving on to number 6, number of shelves S in a bookcase and the number of books B the bookcase can hold. So does the number of shelves depend on how many books it can hold, or does the number of books it can hold depend on how many shelves it has? So for this one, the number of shelves is independent and the number of books is dependent. How many books we can fit on this bookcase depends on how many shelves it has. Okay, potentially if we can add more shelves and get the books to still fit, with more shelves we can have more books on the bookshelf. Number 7, the number of pages P you read in your book and H hours. So does the number of pages you read depend on how long you read, or does how long you read depend on how many pages you read? So for this one, the number of pages we're reading is dependent, hours is independent. Okay, how many pages we can read depends on how long we're reading. And I made a note here. Bless you. The time is usually the independent variable. Time pretty much goes on no matter what. So, whether we're reading in our book, whether we're not reading in our book, the time is going to continue ticking by. Look at number 8. Number of gallons G of water a garden hose produces after running for M minutes. So we can think about again how much water, how many gallons of water depends on how many minutes it's run for, or how many minutes it's run for depends on how many gallons of water it produces. For this one, the M is independent and G is dependent. The gallons of water coming out of the hose depends on how many minutes the hose has been running. Again, we have time involved here again. Like I said, I would say probably 99% of the time, if you have time involved, it's going to be the independent variable. Number 10, number of hours H you spend driving at a speed of R miles per hour. So does the number of hours depend on the speed, or does the speed depend on the number of hours? So for this one, the H is dependent and the R is independent. So here's an exception. Think about it if you're driving somewhere. The amount of time it's going to take you to drive depends on how fast you're driving. If you drive faster, you're going to get there quicker. If you drive slower, it's going to take you longer to get there. Workbook page 55, looking at a few more examples here. Identifying our independent and dependent variables. Number 1, the number of hours H spent studying and the score on the test. So does the hours you spend studying depend on your score on the test, or does your score on the test depend on the hours spent studying? So S would be our dependent and H is independent. The score we get on a test, our grade on our test, depends on how long we studied, generally speaking. Number 2, the length L of a pencil and the number of times T it has been sharpened. So can we say the length of the pencil depends on how many times it has been sharpened, or how many times it has been sharpened depends on the length of the pencil? So for this one, the length of the pencil is dependent on how many times we've sharpened it. How long the pencil is depends how many times we've sharpened it. So if we look at number 3, the length of a story in pages and the number of words in a story. So would we say that the length of the story depends on how many words is in it, or how many words is in it depends on the length of the story? So for this one, P is dependent and W is independent. How many pages is depending on how many words we have in our book. And number 4, number of students S ahead of you in the lunch line and the time it takes you to get to lunch. So the number of students ahead of you depend on how long it takes you to get to lunch, or how long it takes you to get to lunch depends on how many students are ahead of you. For this one, the time is dependent and the S is independent, because the time it's going to take you to get your lunch depends on how many people are ahead of you in the lunch line. Number 10 asks us to name at least 2 independent variables that could result in a change in the monthly cell phone bill. So a couple examples here. Amount of data used, what your cell phone plan is. If you add a phone or fix a phone, is going to change. If you have like a family plan, you have several phones on there, that's going to change the amount if you had to get your phone fixed. The type of phone, if you have a more expensive phone, maybe that gets figured into your monthly cost. It's kind of a transition time here. They had in the book about how many texts were sent. There used to be a charge for per text that you sent, but that's something they've kind of about done away with now.
There's phones that you have to buy like gift.
Number 11, you spend D dollars for G identical pairs of glasses. A friend claims that because D increases if you increase G, and G increases if you increase D, either D or G could be the independent variable. Is your friend correct? And explain. So again, we can try to think about with our variables here, does the money you spend depend on how many pairs of glasses you buy, or does the number of pairs of glasses depend on how many dollars you spend? We could say no, the amount spent depends on the number of pairs of glasses you buy. So actually, D, the amount you're spending, D is dependent on G. G is the independent variable. Okay, again, think about what's happening. You're going to buy the glasses, you bring them up to the register, and then they say, here's how much it costs. So again, not always, but a lot of times the thing that happens first is independent, and what happens next is dependent. Number 12, the cost C of supplies for school depends on other factors. List at least 2 independent variables that could affect the cost of school supplies. Nothing.
I knew it.
So for this one, some things, how many items we need. So number of items needed. So if we have to buy, you know, 1 of something versus buying 5 of something would be one factor. The percent off, like if they're having a sale on the items at the store, that would be another factor that would affect that, just as an example. Number 13, 2 friends hiked the Appalachian Trail from Georgia to Maine. List at least 2 independent variables that could affect the number of days they took to hike the trail. So some things that would affect how long it would take them is the speed they hike, so how fast they're hiking, and the number of miles they hike each day. Those are going to be some factors that affect that. Number 14, Steve has S songs on his music player. He bought N new songs. What is the dependent variable? S would be the dependent variable. The songs on his music player depend on how many new songs he has. Number 15, a baseball team gets 3 outs for each inning it comes up to bat. So far this season, Silvio's team has batted 45 innings and has made 135 outs. What is the dependent variable? T would be the dependent variable because the number of outs depends on how many innings you are batting. Number 18, the cost of a hamburger at a restaurant depends on other factors at a restaurant. Name 2 independent variables on which the cost of a hamburger might depend. So some things include toppings and the size of the hamburger would be some independent variables. And part B, identify the dependent variable and the independent variable. The owner of Arlo's Hamburger Hut records the total income from hamburger sales S and the total number of hamburgers sold H. Here S would be the dependent variable because the total income depends on how many hamburgers are sold. Okay, they have the hamburgers, and again, they have to sell them, kind of like what we talked about with the apples the other day.